one of my lecturers' best advice to us before we graduate. He said, from now on, go and do and read everything not about architecture, right? Because architecture is the outcome, right? But the problem is that when you focus on it too much, we tend to look at the built form, right? We tend to look at, go for the right developer, build your own stuff, right? But actually, if you look at it, architecture from a philosophical viewpoint, architect's role is but to create a background for facilitate human gathering. Be it you're playing, you're sleeping, you're whatever, right? Different human condition. So in fact, for people to appreciate architecture are those people who actually take the trouble to understand this so-called very silent background.
Hai, kita sekarang berada episod yang ke-7 Cakar Ayam. Kalau episod ke-6 kita bincang dengan Effendi. Episod 5 kita bersama dengan Taufik. Episod 4 kita bersama dengan Amar. Dan 2 tu antara yang buat dengan Pian lah. So my next guest is someone, a person that I met during a pandemic. It was a very tough time for a lot of practitioners and designers. But we found solace in the space of Clubhouse. Hi. Architect Wooi.
How are you? Good to see you. Good.
Yeah.
Now you get see in person.
Yeah.
Clubhouse, you just hear each other.
Yeah. I mean, would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh yeah, I'm my name. I think you can call me Lok Wooi or Wooi. That's fine. I'm a practitioner, architect, and with a passion for education lah. Yeah. So I was like spend a lot of time in Sydney. When I come back, I work for someone, and those days 1991 until now.
Oh wow!
I always sort of like at least keep my finger on the pulse lah, on what's happening in education and all that.
Wow. Yeah. I should bring to you one of the panel. So, I mean, one reasons why we're doing this is because in conjunction with Kuala Lumpur Design Festival.
Yeah.
Right? And we're excited to bring that level of energy that we've been wanting to have, the intellectual part of the design end.
Right.
And to have you on board is actually timely. It's about, I think personally, to have someone from practice who wants to talk about the academic part. I think there's a lot of people who wants to chime in, except that they're never in motion. And I'm always been amazed by your energy. Where we were talking at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and with MK.
Well, what else can you do in COVID?
Yeah. And please share, where is this education passion comes from?
I would say actually must be, I think I was influenced when I was studying in Australia lah. And every time, of course, in architecture school, I mean, at the end of the day, when you're an architect, you have to build things, So when we are students, we always look out for architects who came into the school. And then especially architect that we find their work very interesting, especially when to learn about construction and all that. So there's always a steady stream of practitioners who would come in to teach while they are practicing full-time, basically, right? Like my own, I would say my people that influence my thinking, for example, a few names like Russell Jack, Bruce Ricard and all that, those are well-known names. And they are, how should I say, they don't see education as too much separated from architecture and practice. They always go into the university with the view of looking at when is the new idea coming up and things like that, while they are like nurturing the young one. So I thought that was a great idea, right? So it's like, not only that, for example, my interest in education is that you always get to go back into the education where I would say it's the incubator or new idea, right? So you get to not only to teach, but to learn as well. And then to, let's say, so-called impart our knowledge, yes, but to impart is a way of learning as well. Like I said, when you want to teach, you have to have a very clear thought. So to teach is, in fact, one of the best way to learn. So I think that is where my passion coming from. Like a continuing learning as an architect.
Yeah, I mean, that's awesome that you have that sort of like mindset. I think my next question will probably be something along the lines like, in Malaysia, you see that delineation between industry, the practice, and also the academic end. And a lot of times when you look at the academic end, I think it's not so much of the technical knowledge and know-how. I think it's the maturity sets in.
Yep.
You get to see how green this person is.
Yeah.
How do you nurture that sort of more mature mindset to students? Because when you look into the real world and the old school practice and education in Malaysia, they really go hard on you.
Yeah.
Like they kick your model, they tear your work,
yeah.
stuff
Throw
like that,
away
throw away.
Yeah.
They shock your life away, that you might fail your life in whatever. And how do you feel, how do you go about that?
I feel that those time has gone, right? I think if you look at the young people now, I think that the time change, or we call it the Z guys, the spirit of the time has changed. And with digital, you no longer can have a professor pretend to be, oh, because I say so, right?
Yeah.
And then they can easily, when you say, oh, like for example, I love bamboo, I would say, oh, bamboo give out like 39% more oxygen if you compare acre by acre with trees. And if I were to make a statement like that.
Wow.
So
Is that a
immediately,
fact?
that's a fact.
Okay, great.
So they
Now,
were
book that.
immediately, the student, olden day, probably they just listen, professor said so. But now the information is at the fingertip.
Fingertips.
You just click it. This guy's talking nonsense. So they probably stop listening to you. So I think the way of engaging with the young people today is way different. Like for example, you no longer can see young people as somebody that you want to influence or whatever. If you're not in position to influence, it's more like what you have to offer.
Yeah.
And then they will like say, and then for example, as an architect, like if I talk so much, but they look at my work, alamak, this guy is doing this, kan? And then you are talking about like as if you are so high and mighty, you have a special thing. But of all profession, architect and designer, you cannot afford to do that. Because the next thing, they're going to Google your name, right? And looking at the work that you are doing.
Yeah. I'm very aware of my Instagram.
So what happened is that
Yeah.
that's the interesting part, in fact. Like I find that the engagement is very different, like the olden day of tearing the paper and stuff like that. I think maybe they have a reason then, but I think nowadays is very different. And to me, like I'm also very active now, like with UPM. So UPM now with we call the fourth year student, right? I'm in master degree student. And I see that now the approach is more like they call student learning. And it's rightly so. Because the student will be going into, it's not like degree course. Degree course probably is more guided. Like you want them to be like what you're just saying, like in the industry, they expect plug and play type of graduate, right?
Yeah.
So the first 3 years, maybe you can do a bit of that. Like for example, the basic, the bylaw, whatever necessary, technical skill or whatever. I think the first 3 years you can imbue them or build them with that sort of capability or their ability, right? But I think when you go to master degree, master by nature is that why I call master is that you must contribute original knowledge to a particular field, like in architecture. So like for example, in master degree normally it take about 2 years. So the 2 years the student would like culminating their work ultimately on the final year is pretty much their statement that how they see architecture. And in fact, a good thesis, or we call the design thesis, is when the student do a very good research, and then because they already have 3 years prior to the degree, you want to see that how they already form an attitude they have, normally a critique to our built environment or architecture, and therefore their thesis would be like how they would subvert or subvert or even disrupt whatever that we regard as a norm. And you see, if you're looking at it from that angle, is the student in the master degree that doing a lot of research, right? And then if I am the, what do you call, supervisor or teacher or whatever, I'm learning at the same time, right? But I would challenge him, right?
Yeah.
For example, they will say, oh, I want to create a woman's shelter. Then I will say, oh, no, now look, I have to quickly do a research on my own as well. Like Selangor or wherever already have that. So your this thing is no longer a thesis because it's already being done, right? Or you want to design a best condominium, no longer a thesis. But if they were to say that I want to create this co-housing because the housing problem really acute in Malaysia and we want this and that, right? It challenge or what we perceive as the normal. This is when I think as a supervisor, you really have to support that idea. Don't go and throw away the model and things like that. But you want to know what is behind the idea and take a very active role or active listening, if anything. That is where I think the supervisor or educator play a very key role. It's no longer teaching. In fact, all our university now are called research university for that reason.
Obviously, like this is actually one of the questions that were coming out for the festival, and part of it is the change in technology. And I think you know I'm leading with this conversation. Practice like AI, 3D printing, and so forth, that enable generative architectural models, and so forth. And I don't want to say as a layman per se, but how do you think this sort of like new age of practicing will affect the MQA or the academic sector in the design education?
I think, okay, let's look at it in two parts. Architecture, I think they still have to write dissertation, for example, right?
Okay.
A technical dissertation. Then probably that part there, that ChatGPT or whatever AI, you'll put up a lot of challenge for the lecturer.
Yeah.
Because the plagiarism and things like that are very hard to check. Like you can write 3 sentences and then say, ask ChatGPT to give you 3 pages, right?
Yeah.
So they will pick here and there or whatever. Even though I think there also a counter type of software that they can tell, like whether this guy copied from somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? That's getting difficult and more difficult for them to do that. On the other hand, let's say talking about on the design aspect, the architecture itself, the design thesis, I think that is still, in my view, right? Because for even the AI, they have to build on the algorithm work is a certain existing content, right? But probably they'll move on to eventually create their own content, I don't know. But it still need a very original thinking. I mean, it's the thinking behind the project, for example, like what I was just telling you, like Subversion, the idea of co-housing, before it existed, right? Somebody thought about this. And I don't think ChatGPT or AI would come up with idea like that. A very simple comparison is, let's say, because architecture is quite a wide field, right? Let's say I'm an architect, I have 1 acre of land, right? And then the standard practice, if I can put 12 houses there, then I'm most efficient or whatever. But if I'm not a creative architect, and I just put in there in the GDP, program it, do a parameter, right? I want 13 houses, right? I think, of course, ChatGPT probably better. And then more efficient, right? But when those are the things that when you want to make things that within a same paradigm, I think ChatGPT probably can take over. If you still work as an architect.
If you think about the per square feet game and so forth, in a more
most efficient studio unit or whatever, right? But things like from housing to co-housing, office to co-working, that is the thought paradigm shift. And I don't think ChatGPT and things would do that.
Wow, that's the most wisest thing I heard about
I think
housing.
that is to be the... that's why I find that our university is, in fact, over 30 years of involvement or whatever, I feel that we are getting better at what we are doing. In a way, we still have a lot of problem. I think it's more like a systemic problem, like we tend to move towards more science, engineering, and less on art. Whereas those things, like when I said, like thinking between from like housing to co-housing or whatever, those ideas doesn't come from science as such, but it's come from art. For example, you read a lot of books. You actually understand the human condition. Book that's probably outside what we call architecture, right? So those are the things that I find. I think more of a concern that I think more discussions should be had in that area. I mean, to move the education more onto art and humanity, back to more art and humanity.
I mean, that's the counter to the technology and with the industry, especially the practice and also the students. I mean, going to that question, do you feel that the practice can be inclusive of public as well? I mean, I'm trying to challenge either the education or architecture just
can be inclusive
per se to the student space. But what do we think about the public space?
No, in fact, I think there's a certain trend that we are thinking now actually is the community-oriented type of architecture is actually will be a trend in the future. Because if we exhaust our resources, and then like adaptive reuse, for example, right? Like we go to an existing community
Everybody
rather than
wants to
tear everything down.
because of the value.
The value. So you don't rebuild, you don't exhaust more further resources. So I would say that that's totally possible. That there's as a move towards a more community-oriented type of architecture. I think that could be one of the trend, but I don't think it's the only trend. Right?
When we talk about architecture, a lot of it we talks about buildings. What about public spaces? What about, do we have enough some material to work with, especially in the education and design architecture, for example? I give you an example, our public spaces. It seems that we don't talk about this as much. In the academic sector and education, for example, architecture, is there sort of like a material that student would have to work with? Or do you feel that architecture school should not just talk about buildings, or it should talk also about other things, the peripheries of it?
Like what? The periphery, like things outside of architecture, out of built form.
Like politics or
Politics.
social justice.
That's exactly my point earlier about that they move back towards humanity and arts, right? Like I was very, like for example, one time I was very taken aback when one of the students, they don't know who is, like for example,
I have students
Martin Luther King, you know?
That, you know what? Martin Luther King is a really good example. But I have students who doesn't even know Malaysian politics.
That's what I meant by like why humanity is very important. But I think then we should not just look at the higher education as such. We have to look at the bigger context. Like I think one of the students' research introduced a name that I thought it was very relevant. It's called Bronfenner. He's a German psychologist. He's talking about how when we grow up as a child until we go big, and how the sphere of influence, for example, first is our parents, later on it might be our school, and then as we grow up, right?
The social,
like for example, when I in high school, like Form 3, Form 4, right? We have to read during those days. In Malaysia, I'm talking about. We have to read Ranjau Sepanjang Jalan from Shannon Ahmad, for example.
Shannon Ahmad,
right?
The laureate.
Yeah, so that you don't have to be a Malay. After you read that, you don't have to be a Malay to understand. Even urban Malay, right? Not the Malay also different.
Yeah, the
urban Malay would not be appreciated, and then let alone the non-Malay, not to appreciate the hardship, for example, right? And let's say you are going to design for a community in the sawah padi dekat Kedah. Then after you reading that book and not knowing that book, it's two different architects, right?
Yeah.
Two different way of thinking.
Yeah.
So I think that is important. And then just now you mentioned politics. Politics, the current environment is highly politicized or whatever, but the politics is still important. Like there's let's say move suddenly to an urban context. Like for example, you go to a shopping center here, right? And then there's a book called Politics of Space, for example.
Oh, yeah.
Like you can't have a nice cup of coffee without paying for it, sitting down somewhere. That you have to pay for it, right?
Yeah.
And then shopping center is supposed to be supposedly public, like at least 9 to 10 or whatever. Right? but after that,
opening hours.
Then just how we say open space and all those things. I think this is when I think the authority have to work with the design committee very closely.
Awesome.
Right? So you like, for example, place that I'm very familiar, like Sydney, like 20. Now is that you go there, like if you go to Sydney anywhere, you can walk from one end to another. They call the true side link. I mean the ground floor, the most expensive commercial area. But in Sydney area with the grid lock system, you can walk from Pitt Street to Elizabeth or whatever street without any encumbrances. You can go through that. And then that idea was like about 25 years prior, right? So if you're a developer and to develop there, I let you build higher, but you free up the ground floor space, for example.
Wow, I got controversial questions for you now.
So what I'm trying to say is that is policy that basically by the local authority, like the mayor or whatever, right? And then the architects community or the engineer or designer have to come to it, like understanding this action plan. Then after 20 years, you enjoy the fruit.
Correct.
That's what it is.
I mean, I want to go back to education because I think this is like where we really want to get to the gist. Like we were talking about, students should be able to learn all these things, and there's been so much taboo about students talk about politics.
Yeah.
Right. You're not allowed to talk about it.
Yeah.
But in action, actually, that's what architecture means because it's imposing power on spaces. Right. And where I'm coming from is because sometimes I get invited to assess students, final year especially.
Yeah.
When we talk about where students are actually thinking about when they build something, it's always because this is a bubble. You design something in a bubble, therefore that context is yours.
Yeah.
And whatever surrounds it and all, is what you make of a project when you can graduate as an architect or designer and so forth. Do you think actively the space in the education, especially when it comes to architecture, which is very, very important?
Yeah.
Because we realize it's actually something that we built the country on for.
Yeah.
Be able to have that space to talk about those peripheries as important as architecture.
Oh, those are most important. In fact, one of my lecturers' best advice to us before we graduate is from now on, go and do and read everything not about architecture, right? Because architecture is an outcome, right? But the problem is that when you focus on it too much, we tend to look at the built form, right? We tend to look at, go for the right developer, build your own stuff, right? But actually, if you look at it, architecture from a philosophical viewpoint, architect's role is but to create a background for facilitate human gathering, be it you're playing, you're sleeping, you're whatever, right? Different human condition. So in fact, for people to appreciate architecture are those people who actually take the trouble to understand this so-called very silent background, right? But of course, evolved to today is about shape, right? It's about form or what have you, right?
Yeah, we talk about modernist and certain language comes out.
The other thing also, like when you touch about the politics, whether should let the student, whatever, but you will go to even in Australia, right? Those people who are actively in politics, whatever, they are very small margin. In fact, they don't want, right? But in architecture, I think the idea of politics or the understanding of politics is more about how you understand why we design certain things that we do, right? Like for example, people who design a shopping center, they would know Victor Gruen or whatever. In fact, a lot of the time for architects of certain stature, they tend to look down on shopping center.
Got it.
Right? Yeah.
Got it. It's a very cheap way.
It's a very cheap way, very commercial.
Yeah,
commercial
like
architect,
cheap,
like in the lower round.
Yeah, it's like a what you call it, cocaine jab to marketplace.
You see, you have to understand all this. The idea, even like why shopping mall become a shopping mall. If you look at it, it's actually a lot of time is imported.
Yeah,
the idea imported from
That's a quick fix.
The highway shop or whatever. And then we come here, right? So I think from that viewpoint, the peripheral is very important, right? Like we know our society first, and then our position in the society before you label yourself as an architect. Then you will see the role of what you want to create in the long run. And then that's why I think education in Malaysia, I think we have to gear towards that in a way. And then that, to me, came from art and humanities, because that's where you have to go about sociology a bit. You have to know about politics. You have to know about a lot of other things that's not architecture. In fact, the university where I'm from, we must take general study that nothing to do with architecture. And not just for architecture faculty. What it means is to expose you to, if you're an accountant, you have to know a bit of arts. You have to know a bit as a what do you call, more holistic being,
approach.
You know?
Yeah. This is a simple question. What do you think of the programs in Malaysia are offering so far?
I would say there are, I like what I said. I would say, for first year, let's say we split it to degree course and master. Why I do that is because I think degree course is fine, because it's guided. You equip them with the technical knowledge or what have you. Yeah. But master is where you need a very fertile ground. You want to let them open. You want them to go towards, area that you normally find that is taboo or whatever. But you allow that thinking process to go on. In essence, I would say you want to encourage a certain subversion or disruption to what we perceive as a norm.
Challenge an idea.
Yeah.
Challenge that normal.
Otherwise, so we are no longer, then we are moving from.
Nazmi's not going to like that.
Huh? Nazmi? Maybe. But we are talking about, like, for example, when you have like a degree, economic agent, I mean, come out, plug and play, they know the basic. But when you go to master, you actually will probably pluck the fruit when the students sort of mature, right? Then you will have some idea that totally we don't even expect. Right? So there's no longer economy agent. You're creating a critical thinker. And then only the fantastic thing will come off. The original thing will come about. Otherwise, you start to guide and everything, then I think in Malaysia, I think it's good in that sense. But I think systemic problem is that I would say that there's a tendency to move towards more scientific. We want everything to be categorized, measurable, and things like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I blame the sustainability part also at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, so you're losing the human factor.
Yeah. So you want to measure how much you have transferred your knowledge to the next guy? No. Because you go into a good space, architectural space. My favorite building, in fact, is Masjid Kampung Lau, right? It's serving the country for 400 years, almost 400 years, right?
Yeah.
It's the first masjid, right? No dome. It's actually from Prince or from Dharma or something, right? But I went to Nilampuri, at the time still in Nilampuri, just before COVID. It's amazing. Of course, my good friend Hafiz bring me inside. It's that architecture, very unassuming, built of timber, renewable resource, right? Serving for 20 years. It's not a museum.
Yeah.
Community using it, even current, right? Yeah. So that is sort of like summarized. What is the role of architecture? Wow. And then when you're inside, you don't have to be a Muslim. You will be quite taken by the space. Yeah. Natural airflow. There's no GBI or anything like that.
The ingenuity of simple stack effect.
So you tell me, you go into a space like that, how are you going to categorize it? How are you going to measure it? You can't. It's the very holistic experience of a space, right? So that's architecture space. And the problem I had with like moving towards too much to engineering is 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah.
Whereas in design, is 1 + 1 = 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Depending on the
Holistic,
impact and the thought of the impact and where it goes. I like this conversation because where it's leading to the prejudice of vernacular.
Yeah. Against the vernacular.
Yeah, the prejudice against vernacular. I'm a huge fan of someone like Zamtor.
Oh, Peter Zumthor.
Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Peter Zamtor. I'm a huge fan because of the ingenuity of material, very thoughtfulness in social structure, and also because he's done a lot of those sort of projects. Even, and I mentioned this with Pian in our previous podcast, the Four Seasons. Such a beautiful thing if you go to Zamtor. Right? Stuff.
Yeah.
And something that when we look at our own vernacular, there's so much brilliance in it. And I think we're missing the whole plot of our tropical climate.
Yeah, that's right.
And what do you think about that prejudice? Because it's sort of like stemmed even in the education.
I think basically this is where the educator coming in. Like for myself, I love Malaysian timber, for example, right? It's being a renewable resource is one thing.
And all that,
right? We got about nearly 3,000 species of timber that we don't know, right?
Yeah.
So we have plenty of them. A good Malaysian, we just don't care. Lah.
Yeah.
So
but we sell it for a good price outside because it's hardwood.
Yeah. So I think exactly like my own house, I use about 5 different species. And then I think what I'm interested in, like that's why I said humanity aspect is like, for example, I call it the culture of timber, right? Like Chengau, we used to call it Raja Kayu. I mean, Raja, you don't use it a lot, only for structure.
Correct.
And then Resak, Rakyat Kayu. So you more commonly available, so you use it more plentiful.
Yeah.
So you only a few Raja, a lot of Rakyat. It makes sense, right? Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that is a culture aspect. But so if you have the narrative, you understand the narrative, right? And then you look at this thing, right? So you don't, you feel in love, you fall in love with wood as a material, renewable resource, right? So you no longer, that ignorance removed, then I think we have hope, right? Yeah. Like for example, we no longer like look at wood last time, but now people are, especially the high-end houses, they beginning to understand that. And then a lot of people are writing in about how the positive impact here and there.
Yeah, I can tell you because my client is Malaysian Timber Board, Malaysian Timber Council. I think we have a good fair share in our debate about architecture. In fact, I think the highlight of the year, or this year or last year, that the Swedish government is actually building a timber city.
Oh.
Yeah. And KLDF is actually bringing that conversation to the fair. And I love this conversation because the prejudice against vernacular is always the assumption of the most immediate way to solve to the bang for the buck, per se, for the concrete. And I don't know if there's an agenda to actually drive this, but it seems that it has a steady stream of just simply taking that idea into the concrete idea into the world.
I think the timber conversation, for example, is stand to the test of science. I mean, I'm not moving towards more art and humanity. We're going to neglect engineering. I mean, architecture is engineering as well, engineering and science as well. Architects have to know about that. Yeah. Like I give you an example. For example, I'm very much agree with you. Like I think we don't know our wood. That's why I think we are losing on that. Yeah. Like you see, like even our neighbor, like in Singapore, there are 6-story building built of timber. Why not Malaysia? There's no reason why not, right? And then you're talking about, like I said, the test of science is that Singapore's bomba requirement is very stringent, right? It's not less stringent than Malaysian, right? It's just that we have to relook together with bomba, right? To look at this thing because you see, I happened to interview the person who built the Mactan Airport in our region in Philippines, in Cebu, Philippines. Is that they can calculate for you every hour they will go in by 0.7 millimeter when it's burned.
Charcoal.
And after the char is done, it's actually become insulator. Correct. It doesn't go any further in. So it's still, we want to build we are not being sentimental about wood and then we build an unsafe building. But what I'm saying is that you can build a safe building and even safer, right? If you, let's say you use steel, for example.
Yeah, we'll let
burn, it buckle, everything collapse, right?
Correct.
And then you are, like Malaysia, the oldest building, very interesting, is in Frame, the masjid in Frame, in Glue Lamp, right?
Glue Lamp.
But CLT and things like that, we are totally, I think we are, of course, I'm not blaming Frame or any other this thing, but it's that Like somebody would have to take a first step. But to me, as an architect, I will introduce it to my client, right? Like CLT, that to take the role, that actually start producing it, right? In Malaysia, using our local wood. Right? So I think this is the thing that we, as educator, that's why when I go into university, that's why I like it. Is main thing is that even all the university that I've been to, all the major universities I've been there, save maybe USM a bit further away lah. So is that I always tell them to must have a particular module at least, or option or whatever, on Malaysian timber. And not just about the technical aspect, but learn about the culture of timber. When we know something is so beautiful, then naturally we want to protect it, right? Yeah. Protect it. And then it become very expensive. Like you said, okay, not bankable document because it's timber. It's true in Australia previously. But now, we call it MET, Mass Engineering Timber, like for example, the one in Singapore.
Glulam, CLT.
Yeah, you can bankable because it's actually as safe, if not safer. Like if it's just a raw steel, it's safer than a raw steel. Yeah. Because it will buckle and this thing. So those are the things. To me, it's like, that's why I said, maybe a bit harsh, but it's true, it's ignorant. But ignorant is lack of knowledge, that's all, right? So I think that's what I mean.
Okay, let's go back to the basis of architecture as to a new young graduate to come in. I mean, what are the elements that they should learn? What they should learn to prepare them to be a good architect, at least?
I think Malaysian education, when you say that, okay, the degree course, in fact, I don't have any problem with that. Right? I don't have, except that I'm moving to engineering, but I don't mind for the degree course because you want them to be capable of studying everything. But I think probably have to inject more of humanity and art aspect to it. You don't want a technically proficient person because to me, like by law, for example, yes, things that you can learn outside of university, you shouldn't emphasize in the university. Like even for example, all the BIM or all the digital thing. Sometimes YouTube people, they learn faster than the lecturer have taught, right? So those are the things to me, they can be, the student themselves encourage them to learn outside of the university. So that part, I think you can equip the student enough on the technical aspect. To me, that's sufficient. And in fact, I think you said what should they learn? And in fact, that's what I mean by critical thinking, right? How are we going to, for example, I won't say necessarily export. If we can, of course, we want to export our ability and stuff like that. Is that we definitely have to come out with something that other people don't have. And I think that source is not from the technical aspect, but it's more on the thinking aspect. So I would say first 3 years, emphasize on the technical, but I think it should also increase a lot on the art and sociology aspect. Then when they move on to the master degree, they have the ideal student for me is that when the fourth year is that they're already very, very vocal on certain critiques about what's wrong with Malaysian situation right now, for example, environmental or whatever. And then they want to do this, right? Either be it social, housing is I look at our PPR. Are we very proud of our PPR? I think that there's one typologies that we can say that the government try, right? But is it housing is a numbers game? How do we crunch the number in the first place? Does everyone need the same three bedroom that what we are providing them? Or should they have more? Or other maybe have less? So you have a composite or whatever, right? So it's the new way of looking at people's need from a fresh eye, rather than a very standard way that
Newtonian scientific model of projection of human.
Then we use our RMK 1 until now, it's the same thing. Why? Right?
It's the mindset.
Yeah, it's a mindset. So you want to break that mindset. And how do you do that? To me, is to really discuss, let the freedom of the student, give the freedom to the student to discuss the real, you call it peripheral. To me, those are the core issue.
Fantastic.
Right? Because outcome is come from the thought. I think Albert Einstein came up with a very good remark, isn't it? Like he said, the thought that get you here will not get you there, right?
Oh wow! Right? Oh wow! Yeah.
So you have to demolish the mold, So the other thing is also if you're repeating the same mistake, keep doing the same thing over and over again, try to solve the same problem that you cannot solve, something wrong in your thinking. Yeah. So I think our education should should gear towards creating not so much economic agent that we already can handle, I think, within the 3 years. But we want to encourage them for, a very, very open-minded, open to ideas type of environment that you force them to be critical. So the candidate that I'm very worried about is that after third year, they have to do an intern outside, in the industry, and then come back to fourth year. Every time, a lot of time I have to do this to them because they will say, oh, you tell us the design is so good, but the developer don't really care about what we say. They still want to market the Belvedere or some English sounding development that don't care about what you say or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then they feel a bit let down, right? Then fourth year, then they stop thinking already because they don't really trust what you are telling us, right? That to go through design, all that. Whereas the systemic practice is like that.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
we got our fair share with developers lah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm not blaming on the developer as well, but if they know about the idea, right? If they know about the idea of this education, and then why they have to outsource their idea from outside of the country, right? Our Malaysian, I can tell you, our Malaysian student, right? To say, is it this thing? You go to any country, anywhere, a good architecture school or whatever, in the clubhouse you would know.
Oh yeah.
Right? A lot of them hold key position.
Yeah.
And creative position.
Yeah. I mean,
so that goes to show is Malaysian young people, Malaysians generally, we are very smart people.
Yeah. I mean, I wanna dive to this question too, and I think it's partly because how we were trained last time, back in the late 90s, crossing to millennia. A lot of students used to struggle with a lot of technical work.
Yeah.
And when they study abroad, it seemed that it doesn't matter what amount of technical work you do. Is it meaningful to what you actually try to respond to? And they tend to struggle answering to that very straightforward question because I can do 10,000 drawings.
Yeah.
I'm no problem with that. I can put the hours. But if you ask me to do strategies and thinking, I have problems with that. I mean, how do we address that issue?
I think this is again like what I said. They definitely the student. I think we also have to look at the education pre-U, right? Like in Sydney, for example, I can see that during matriculation, you talk to the student there, they already have a rough idea. They want to be a politician or whatever. They're already exposed to the idea, right? So in Malaysia, no, we don't have that. We still have a very strict curriculum. So there's one stage. The second stage when we already receive them in the university, right? That's where we actually, if they don't get this from the pre-U, we should really, like what I said, the art and humanities or whatever, this idea, like the critical thinking will come from the idea that now you call it peripheral. To me, at the end of the day, it's the core, right? The technical thing is important, yes. But what I'm saying is that, like what you said, is exactly, I think, the key issue in Malaysian education is that we want to have the student to be free in thinking, and yet we are sort of straitjacket them, right? And then a lot of the time, I think people think that I'm against engineering. I'm not. But what I'm trying to say, when you use too much of this reductionist thought, right? Like how you must do, you look at the rubric, how do you judge the student, right? How many 20% for your concept? How many percent for this?
Oh,
right?
I've always questioned that, but, we're just being paid to do so.
Yeah. So, but you see, at the end of the day, I'm in the education as well, is that you have to runcit, Like this student, you don't want this outstanding work, right? You don't want to downplay it, give them just A, and then this particular A not good as that A. Then you become like a runcit, how many marker here and there. But actually, like what I said again, like for example, the experience of the space. Like for example, I use the Masjid Kampung Laut, right? You don't have rubric in your head. When you go inside the space, you're so impressed. And then your sense of aesthetic, your sight, your hearing, your smell, everything complete. You experience the immersive into that environment. Where do you have the rubric, right?
Yeah, you can't explain
how do you
that.
categorize it?
Yeah, you can't explain. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's an art on its own.
So that is what we need. And then to me, architecture, especially the site visit, knowing, really go across to an area that you're not familiar with. Those are very important. Like Like that's why I say Malaysian are quite good in the sense that before COVID, I have my, like, for example, lecturer will bring them to London when if you have a budget lah,
Yeah,
to go
yeah.
to
We used to try. Yeah, students
right.
used to do
So
travel.
those are that you look at, not say that you learn from other people's country. Sometimes it's that because you are in other people's country, you come to appreciate your own country more.
Yeah,
Things that you take for granted.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree, 100%. I mean, I want to go back to how we started the clubhouse thing.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. It was nights where I would wait until the hour. Hey, you know what? I think it's time. I'll tell my wife to put my daughter to sleep. I just got to attend to some meeting.
Clubhouse.
Clubhouse. Yeah. Wow. I mean, how did it came about for you?
The what?
The clubhouse.
The clubhouse, because actually first we have nothing better to do, and in fact,
oh God, that doesn't sound right. But yeah,
but what I'm saying is that it's not to say nothing better to do, but I really feel that as architects or designer or whatever, or people with concern with life generally, right? We want to discuss. We want to have a community that we can discuss ideas, right? So that's why it come about. But you're not the only one. I go to UiTM when I go to all the students say, Sir, where's your clubhouse? But I sort of like, when I don't have a good topic, then I don't want to talk about this, right? And then also I would say that is more like we want to discuss issue that we normally don't discuss. But in fact, I think now we are quite lucky. Those topics start to prop up, right?
Yeah.
Like things that you're talking about, community, urban design, for example, is unheard of.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And then Clubhouse is actually, at that time, it give you a very easy access. You have Hajida, suddenly, a well-known architect coming in, a well-known planner also come in, you know.
Shuana,
Yeah, and then Dato Kamal, you know, they are big people, right? So I mean, of course, because maybe the nature, the facts that I'm quite a veteran architect myself, so they feel that probably it's a safe space. That they know who Lok Kuang is, you know, he actually have want to create a safe platform. And then of course you come in, your new friend like yourself, coming in like guys from London or wherever, everywhere people coming in. So it become, to me, it's a very nourishing for discussion on things that we care about. So I think Clubhouse started from that basis.
What do you get from that? I mean, I know it's like really wholesome sort of like energy, but what are the things that you've learned from that conversations in Clubhouse, those late nights, those supposedly lonely became very colorful, you know, and when you sleep in bed, sometimes you don't get to sleep immediately because ideas are popping out suddenly, right?
Yeah.
What are those like golden nuggets that you get from it out of it?
I think it's a lot. I think first off, I feel that it's actually our creative society, right? Our creative community is actually very vibrant, very fertile, right? That's number one. Like for example, I'll give an example, like for example, the issue of part 3 exam, whatever.
Oh, wow.
So I managed to check up to professor at that time, I think he retired now, Arifin, who drafted the LAM maps, you know. He's one of the key person who drafted it out. Then he came on and then he can talk and stuff like that. And then you can see the contribution. It's a very sincere, it's a very upfront, a very authentic type of listing, right? If you say the nugget, right?
Yeah.
Not so much the knowledge that I get from there, right? But it also gives me a comfort in my heart that actually people in our circle, we try to really see what we can do to make the situation better, for example. I think probably that hit me the most, right? And then like, for example, other thing, for example, I get like people like Dr. Marek Kolowski, you know, he's from very experienced.
Yes. Oh, he comes often.
That he is like a Malaysian, he married a Malaysian, a very well-known planner as well. But when he give us a very interesting perspective at how we look at our royal town. Like for example, you know, Jugra, you know, that we take it for granted. We don't even know sometimes, right? Like Kuala Kangsar, Muar, and whatever. Why they are called royal town, whatever. How they came about, and a lot of time how we deal with our landscape. For example, one of the key thing that now actually always stuck in my mind was that how we actually take our feature, our landscape for granted. For example, you know, you go to Johor Bahru, you go to Kota Kinabalu or whatever, our planning always turn our back against the sea.
You are right.
so we don't seem to like Lido in Johor Bahru.
You're right.
No more already,
You're right. You're right.
So why is like that?
Yeah, you're right. We're not
So it make us-
capitalizing on
Yeah.
the nature of things.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we sort of like, same as when our, like for example, our what do you call, you mentioned about like, for example, our timber or whatever, same thing. Because we have plentiful, like you are in a situation, you tend to like, that's your blind spot. The Chinese have a saying, it say the darkness underneath the light.
Oh, wow.
Because it casts a shadow. So that's the part closest to you, but you don't see.
Yeah.
Right. So I think those are the if you say nuggets, those are things that personally I learned.
Wow. Wow. I mean, I wanna go to the part where we're talking about us who are turning against our back, especially with the richness and all that kind. Do you feel that with the I don't want to say the current political situation, whatever, I would say in a very apolitical manner, like in contemporary times, do you think Malaysia is ready for the next global jump to do whatever we want as free as we can as an identity?
No, I don't see the reason why not. Right. I'm talking to you, although it might be anecdotal. Like what I said, I've been to many university, private, maybe Utah, Taylor. I went to UKM. I also involved with UKM as a reviewer. UITM, I was also assessor and reviewer. So I meet the people who teach, and then I meet the young people who learn, the student and the architects there, right? I tell you, even UKM, right? They have the bangsa kebangsaan identity, and they're very critical looking at it. They are not asking you to come out with Minangkabau roof and then claim that it is a Malaysian.
Yeah,
Malaysian
on a
architecture. So
like
they-
15 feet rise, high rise
but
building.
Those
Minangkabau.
conversation has passed. So the group of lecturer there, the preoccupation is much larger than that. They start to go into the so-called the peripheral things, right? So I'm saying, what your question, if I were to rephrase it, why not now? It looked like, to me, almost like all the planets are aligned. The student, I can tell you, every time I go to UITM, I mean, okay, barring other university might be upset with me, but their final, for example, their fourth year and fifth year's work always amaze me. Although I complain about their thing can be a bit stringent or whatever. They're the student. They're the young Malaysian, right? So what I'm trying to say is that in terms of whether our minds thought are there already, I think we are there, right? Notwithstanding, I said, inject a lot of this art and humanity or whatever. Privately, they read up, right? They only need, I would say that some, not to say validation as such, like people who would, like if you get a good educator, like for example, they have a topic that would sympathize with them and really build them up, right? While they are, because it's quite a rigorous process for master degree, right? So in terms of, I think, level of thinking or the maturity of thinking, to me, we are there. So I think to take on the new next globalized jump or whatever, I think we are there. What surprised me? Well, we're not. Start jumping. That in fact what surprised me in terms of architecture and design.
Wow. I mean, before we end, I just want to ask, what are your recommendations of books that I think anyone who wants to know about architecture, or at least on education, should read?
I think that's a tough question, actually. I would say that actually architects, I think there are so many books, right? But maybe there's one very old book, right, by David Ladobaro. The book is called The Roots of Architectural Invention. Right? Why I recommended that book is that he pare down, right, all the style, this style, that style, whatever, but he go back to the root of why things are being created. I think that book would be a very interesting primer, I think, for potential architecture student. Yeah, there'll be one book. But I would say, to me, I think I still prefer them to read some novel. Here are some of them. One is, okay, go back to read, if you're Malaysian, go and read Ranjau's Sepanjang Jalan again.
Yeah.
And then if you're Australian, it'll be Kunadu. Kunadu is a story of an Aboriginal woman. It gives you a totally new perspective about how we look at Australia, right, as a place. We have to read it during matriculation. And then one more book is by an American author. It's called Black Like Me, right? It's a white man that want to know how a black man live. It's a real story. So these are the three books, I think, because I think architecture is about humanity. And when we can cross the line of just, because we are born as Chinese, Malay, Indian, or white, or whatever, right? It's beyond our
Control.
holistic control. But as architects, somehow we have to jump out from our skin, so to speak, right? We need to design for someone or a community or what have you, right? And those few books that I mentioned, is that, like, for example, Kunadu is probably, if you're in Malaysia, grown, born and bred. If I haven't been to Australia, I probably don't even know, don't even care, right? But when you read it, then you understand a different way of living. Sort of
Human
reflected
factor.
on
Yeah, human factor.
a human factor of what we do. So these are 3 books to me are very important. Like Ranjau Sepanjang Jalan is actually always in my mind, right? I'm from Kedah myself. So you even from Kedah, that my father very unusual in the sense he can speak Thai, he can speak Malay like a Malay or what have you, but he would like always remember. Like my place called Tanah Merah, right? So when we are in the Pekan, we're already much better off than a lot of Malay in the Kampung Cakar Ayam. When at that time, I don't know who is the a minister of education. They have to wear all white, you know. So you just imagine heavy rain, right? You have to make sure your shoe is white, right? You have to put in the plastic bag, you know. Cycle from Guacapayang, red earth, to come to the town to take a bus to the school. So how do you do that, right? So Ranjau Sepanjang Jalan is sort of like, to me, when I read it, I say, oh, I can understand because my back is sawapadi and things like that. So while I'm thinking my father is not rich at all, but at least you can see a comparison and then you can understand what other community, what they have been through, the idea behind the thing. And then I go to Australia. Oh, I studied Kunadu. I was so taken aback. It's just totally a new world. And then you come back to looking at our own country, then you will look at it from a different angle altogether, right? We are actually but a community of people, right? With different background or whatever. So we are talking about high idea or spiritual idea of inclusivity and stuff like that. That sort of like start to home in your mind. So when I draw something, you no longer just draw a simple line. You will draw something that with all those thought in mind. So I think that to me, if you want to be an architect, be interested of being a human first, and being interested in human as a society first. And I think whatever you create, either a high-rise building or, to me, I do a lot of houses, is that then I think your product or your whatever work that you have will carry a different meaning, right? So that would be my recommendation.
Thank you very much. Wow. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, those are like some of the most wisest thing within this series of Cakar Ayam. And it's
Supposed to Cakar Ayam,
Cakar
right?
Ayam, right? We'll just sketch it out. So thank you very much. We have Architect Wooi for coming here. We really appreciate his time, despite being very famous in TikTok now.
No. Totally incidental.
Yeah. So to know more about what this is all about, I wanna thank everyone, the production team, and everyone else involved in this project. We'll see you on the next episode. If you like this video, click a share, like everyone else would say. So thank you very much. It's been a wonderful evening with Architect Wooi. Thank
Same
you
here.
so much.
Thank you for inviting.
All right.
A pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a wrap.